It's a real pleasure to finally be here in Mumbai. It's been a little tough getting here. You'd think coming from Singapore, it'd actually be pretty easy. I spend a fair amount of my time traveling around the region in the various countries with different customers. And one of the exciting things about that role is you never know exactly what a customer is going to want to talk about. Sometimes customers are focused on trying to just understand more about emerging trends, things like the cloud and how do I get many of the benefits of the cloud behind my own firewall, things like private cloud technologies. Sometimes it's things like consumerization. How do I deal with this growing trend towards bring your own device? Sometimes it's on much more tactical problems. How do I get better efficiency out of provisioning and managing my existing compute infrastructure? Or how do I migrate off of legacy Unix or mainframe systems so I can unlock a lot of that efficiency and turn more of my budget towards innovation? But consistently, as I talk to customers, the challenge around the amount of money, the amount of time they're spending managing their storage infrastructure always comes up. And that takes kind of two trends as well, or two sides as well. Some customers want to understand what are the new buzz phrases, what are the new big trends that are coming up, and how do I start to at least be aware of those, if not actually harness them to manage my infrastructure. And other customers just want to understand how do I just do better with what I have. And so in this presentation, we're going to spend a little bit of time on both sides of that. As Mamta was talking about with big data, a lot of hype right now around big data. How many of you think you have a firm understanding of what big data is? Not a lot. How many have implemented a big data solution? Okay, that's pretty common. We've done this in Malaysia, we've done this in Singapore and Tokyo, throughout the region. And there's usually a couple of people in the room that have implemented a big data solution and a lot more that aren't real familiar with it. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the front of the presentation and talk about big data, how Dell sees it, how we see it being used, and more just kind of to share with you our broader vision around that. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation talking about Dell's point of view around fluid data and how to optimize your existing infrastructure. So first of all, if we think about big data, I think it's always good, particularly in the beginning of a new technology adoption, to kind of take a step back and look at what we mean by the term. Cloud was a great example. Everything was becoming a cloud, and it got very overhyped. Well, there's a lot of that right now going on with big data. And so when Dell thinks about big data, there's 3 or 4 attributes that we think of. One is they're very large data sets. So not your typical 100 megabyte files, but files that could be terabytes in size. Second of all, it's fast-moving data. So it's changing very, very rapidly. Third of all is there's many times mixed data types. It's not just all structured data in a relational database management system. It could have MPEG files. It could have photos. It could have all sorts of different structured and unstructured data types. And the fourth attribute typically is I have a fairly narrow window in which to analyze that data, make business decisions so that I can affect the outcome. And so there was an article just recently in the New York Times about the U.S. retailer Target. And it was a great example of big data. One of the things that Target's doing is they're taking a look at people that come in and they're profiling them. So they took a look at, for example, a woman that comes in and maybe she buys, cocoa butter, maybe she buys folic acid, extra vitamins, and a bag that would be big enough to double as a diaper bag. Well, now looking at all those different disparate data points, Target's being able to realize this is probably a woman that's pregnant. And if I can send her 6 months from now coupons for Pampers diapers, they've seen a conversion then of those coupons that they've tailored to that particular lady, whereas a year ago, 2 years ago, there would have been no way to really even identify that this is somebody that was actually in the middle of a pregnancy. So there's a simple example of where a retailer is looking at lots of different data sources and drawing conclusions that otherwise might not have been intuitive. And so as you look at going into big data, we see it as kind of a five-step maturity model. You know, it starts, and the Target example is a great example. They knew people were buying all of those individual items, but they didn't know how to connect that to the ability to cross-sell other things to that consumer. So a lot of times it starts with chaos. No data, there's no value associated with that, and there's no way to access that information. As you move into stage 2, what Target started doing was retaining a lot of that data. So at least if I'm storing that information and I know who's buying what, then I can at a future date start to use that. And that's been a big trend towards frequent flyer cards, loyalty cards, things like the Target shopping cart. If I don't know who's actually buying what, there's no way at a future period in time I'll be able to analyze that. As you leave stage 2 and go out of the retention, how do I start to optimize? These are different types of storage architectures that are going to be required and different types of storage technologies that are going to be required to apply to these different types of problems. So how do I optimize my storage? How do I start to derive value from the data and understand what real phenomena are driving those behaviors, and then be able to optimize my business decisions to change my marketing or cross-selling or specific actions. And you go more into a sustain mode. And this is where you go from bits to actual data to now I have what I'd consider real information that I can act upon. As I go to stage 4, I want to be able to start to do analytics on that. Right now I have an optimized infrastructure, I have a repository, I have the data, but I want to start to be able to proactively act upon that. Proactively be able to target different customers with different offers, and then be able to monetize this. And then finally, as I get into stage 5, I want to be able to do increasingly more complex modeling, increasingly more complex analytics. Right? I want to leave a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-3 ratio to maybe an end-to-end. Right? There might be thousands of different variables. I'm trying to analyze all in parallel, and in a very short window, a matter of minutes, be able to give an answer and then make strategic decisions on my business where I'm going to invest. But I think it's also important to note that the value associated with these solutions doesn't come in stage 5. You don't need to make the big investment. You don't need to get everything mature and deployed before organizations start to see value. As you look at the far left side of this slide, the chaotic side, certainly there's a loss of value, and there's not any gain. But even as I get into stage 2, the reactive stage, I'm starting to deliver information, I'm starting to deliver value. And then that value just continues to increase, and the loss associated with sub-optimization and the loss associated with lack of control decreases as I go forward, so the overall business benefit just continues to increase. But now I introduce a whole new set of problems. Now I'm capturing even more data than I was before. I'm capturing bigger data sets. I'm capturing more information that I want to retain for even longer periods of time. So in many regards, I've actually made my problem of data management even worse than it was before I started down this journey. And so how do I retain this information? I like the analogy, a lot of times you have to keep the whole haystack just to find the needle. And you don't always know what relations you're going to want to look at a later period. So the need to save all of this data continues to increase. And so from Dell, there's a couple of solutions that we've been working on to solve this. Dell's approach to big data, and as Arijit said, Dell's very committed to being open, capable, and affordable. So a lot of Dell's approach towards big data is around open and standards-based types of approaches. And that's very different than what you would see from all of our major competitors, which are offering much more of a proprietary stack type of an approach here. We've been working with Hadoop engines for many years now. In fact, we were working with a services company called Perot Systems that actually had done a lot of work around Hadoop engines, and that was one of many reasons we actually bought Perot a few years ago. And so if you think about Hadoop, there's a partnership that Dell is engaged in with a company called Cloudera. So Hadoop is an open source stack or an open source tool that allows you to handle lots of different data sets, lots of different velocity of data, and analyze that very, very quickly in a scale-out type of a fashion. Cloudera is for Hadoop what Red Hat is to Linux. It's a standardized, kind of a hardened version of Hadoop that comes with service end support. So from an enterprise customer, it takes a lot of the risk associated with an open source solution out, but it also gives you a peace of mind from a service and support standpoint. Rainstore, on the other hand, is a big data retention solution. And the big value that we liked about Rainstore was that it significantly reduces the amount of data that you're actually retaining and storing. Data optimization anywhere in the 40 to 100x compression rates. So if you think about that, I can reduce 98% of the data footprint that I'm actually storing and retaining, and only have to physically retain 2% of it. Also, ease of operation. No specialized skill sets. It runs natively on Hadoop. So with that, just as a little bit of an overview of big data, kind of where we see it, I think increasingly what you're going to see is kind of two approaches in the market. I think you're going to see Hadoop-based approaches, which are going to offer high degree of customization, going to offer very, very cost-effective economics. And then I think you're going to see increasingly more of an appliance type of an approach. And so as we go through the year, Dell will be making more announcements with some different appliances with some of the major software vendors to ease the deployment and ongoing management of big data solutions. So let's turn now and talk a little bit about some of the pains we see in today's organization. Arjit already mentioned, a common pain that we hear from almost all customers is this whole notion of a forklift upgrade. And the storage vendors have gotten pretty good at this. Every 3 or 4 years, they refresh the platforms, and you have to basically throw away all your previous investments and rebuy them. And so I'll talk a little bit about Dell's view of why that's probably not the right way to be viewing storage and some different alternatives for that. So if you think about your current storage infrastructure, there's typically 6 main pain points that we see. And those pain points end up resulting in a significant tax on that data. There's a cost associated with the data. The first one is around this data growth. Data is growing very, very quickly. Both of the previous presenters talked a little bit about some of the trends and what the market is seeing. Every customer I talk to is seeing an explosion of data, as well as the different types of data sets they have to manage. Another big problem is that 80% of my data is inactive. You look at a recent study from McKinsey on email. Right? If I don't touch an email within 30 days, the likelihood that I'll touch it drops by 98%. Right? So why would I want to store that email that's got a 2% chance that I'll ever touch it again on tier 1 fiber channel storage? Right? So data's inactive. I do need to retain it, but I want to do it at the right price point and the right availability window. Systems are complex and very inflexible to manage. As I talk to customers, it's not just the upfront cost of managing storage, but associated with all of this complexity and data silos, they end up spending $3 to $4 in ongoing management costs of that storage for every dollar they spent to buy the storage. Data recovery is difficult and slow. On the difficult side, there was a Gartner study that estimated something like 20% of all tape backups fail. So from your perspective, I guess the question becomes, which day of the week do you not really need? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Because one of those 5 days is most likely going to not either back up or not be able to restore. Replication is very costly and can equally be unreliable. I end up buying a complete duplicate of everything that I'm already running in my production facility. I have to hire an entire staff to manage that. I have to purchase expensive software to synchronize between the sites. And then the last piece is, as I alluded to in the beginning, forklift upgrades and the risk of technology obsolescence. And if you take a look at the storage architectures of the last 20 years, as I mentioned, every 3 or 4 years, the vendors come in with a new platform. They tell you have to throw away the old platform and then migrate all your data over to the new one. And as I throw away the old platform, I have to rebuy all of the software, all of the snapshotting, all the replication, all the software functionality that I purchased on the previous platform. So not only is it highly disruptive to my business, it ends up being very, very expensive. And Dell's point of view is that the right storage architecture should be fluid. It shouldn't take this degree of manual intervention to move data around. Data should more logically just flow to the right tier of storage at the right price point with the right degree of data protection. Transform your, what today in many cases is a rigid cost center, much more to a flexible productivity center, whether that's using online transactional processing for business decisions, things like big data, or simple things like email, and really allow you to shift your spend from IT operation to innovation. That gets back to kind of Arijit's comments, moving that needle from 80% of the budget spent just kind of running the business and keeping the lights on to 50% of the budget spent on that and 50% of the budget spent on innovation. And so what can Fluid Data do for you? Well, first of all, maximize efficiency. The technologies we're going to talk about today as we go through the day together really are focused on how do I get more efficiency out of the actual disk that I buy? How do I maybe save 80% either in the upfront amount of storage I buy or how I utilize that storage? Things like thin provisioning and virtualization technology so that I get much better utilization of the actual storage that I do purchase. Greater agility. Wouldn't it be great if you could deploy and provision storage in less than a minute instead of taking 3 or 4 days sometimes to bring new storage capacity online? And then the final one is guaranteed resiliency. Certainly as we look out, spending a bunch of money on expensive data that's not there when the business needs it is of no value. And so that resiliency that's built into the architecture that gives you, 5 nines or even better uptime. And so I thought it'd be good to give at least kind of one example of some things we've done here recently in India. Adunik is a local Indian company, and one of the problems they were struggling with was around that whole business agility piece that I was alluding to a moment ago. And so what they wanted to do is that as their business needs grew and changed, to very flexibly and quickly add incremental capacity. And so they chose the Dell EqualLogic solution, and you can see some of the results that they ended up achieving. 40% better operational efficiency, 20% reduction in customer delivery time, and ultimately very happy with the Dell partnership. And so as you look at Dell and you look at your own infrastructure, there's a lot of different storage problems you're trying to solve and a lot of different storage processes. I might have file systems for my large file or for NFS or CIFS. I might have block data for high performance structured data type of challenges. And increasingly, I'm going to have more and more large file sizes that I'm going to want to retain and store. So things like object data. I'll have local recovery as well as long distance recovery. And while I still think it's a little bit more of a vision and not so much real today, I may want to back up more and more of that to the cloud. Rather than pay for that myself, pay for all the management associated with that, just put that out in the cloud and let somebody else do that for me. And that's really where Dell's going with our Fluid Data architecture. And so I'm going to talk a little bit here, just to be clear, on what we have today, but also where we see Dell going in the future. Because as people look at making a storage partnership decision, it's not just who has the best technology today, and we certainly are pretty proud of some of the technology that we have, but it's also, do I really believe that over the next 2, 3, 4 years, I'm partnered with the right company that has the right vision that's going to continue to innovate. So I'll talk a little bit about both, what we have today, as well as kind of as we continue to go forward where we see the opportunities. So today we have a virtualized scale-out storage architecture. And so some of the key things are things like automated tiering. So the ability to write to very high-performance SSD or high-performance fiber channel, and then in the background, while the storage array is still online and delivering maximum performance, be able to move that data over to lower cost, lower tiers of storage, things like SATA drives or disk-to-disk backup or other tiers of storage. Things like non-disruptive upgradability. If you look at the Compellent system, for example, the ability to take a system that I purchased 5 years ago, and maybe I bought that with 1 gigabit fiber channel, but now I want to upgrade it to 10 gig iSCSI. The ability to take out those old modules and plug in new modules and preserve that investment without having to do a forklift upgrade. And oh, by the way, I still preserve my investment on the software side, because with Compellent, once you buy the licenses, you never have to rebuy them. So not only do I not have to have a forklift upgrade, but more importantly, I don't have to keep repurchasing these software licenses every 2, 3, 4 years as I throw away all my old investment. Object-based archiving. Increasingly, we're seeing the need for object-based storage, things like medical records, right? Large file size, I need to be able to provide that data to a patient in a very specific quality of service and time window. Banks and financial institutions need to keep records of every check that clears, and then if I ever have a question or I get audited, be able to show the actual timestamp and the processing of that check. But how do I make that content aware? How do I compress that data so I can store maybe 1/10 of what I've actually physically store 1/10 of what I actually originally stored? And how do I make that policy-based in terms of migration? And then in addition, backup to disk. Increasingly, we see customers having more and more data to back up and a shrinking time window to back those up. And tape's just not going to get there, right? The velocity of the tape is just not going to improve or increase enough to be able to keep with those changing demands. And so how do I back up more and more to disk? How do I compress that data on that disk? And how do I deduplicate that data on that disk? And finally, how do I do that in a unified fashion? I don't want to necessarily buy a block system for this workload and a file system for that workload. So how do I provide a scalable, unified infrastructure that allows me to handle both file-based services as well as high-performance block systems? As we go forward, we think there's more opportunities to continue to optimize all of those great things that we're already offering today. How do I make it content-aware deduplication and compression so that the system is smart enough to know what type of content is being stored, how that data might be used in the future, how do I optimize the tier that it goes on to, and how do I optimize the compression? And then how do I rehydrate only on content access? So I don't need to store full versions of all the data. How do I manage all of this through one pane of glass? I don't want to have a separate management system for my file system, a separate management system for my block system, a separate management system for my object-oriented storage. How do I get one single management system and then integrate that with the migration of the data across all of these tiers of storage? How do I integrate this with the server? Increasingly, we're seeing much more storage capacity available in the actual server itself. If you look at the 12th generation launch we recently did, we've actually incorporated more and more SSDs in the server. Now I can run a database actually in the server itself. Optimizes performance, minimizes the amount of fiber channel disks that I might need outside the server. So how do I start to not just now integrate across different tiers of storage, but think about the compute nodes themselves as kind of tier 0 server-based storage? And then finally, as we were talking about before, how do I seamlessly integrate this with the cloud? How does my infrastructure get smart enough to know that, look, if this piece of data hasn't been touched in the last 60 days, I'll go archive that to the cloud. I'll compress it, I'll deduplicate it, but I'll store it somewhere else so that I'm not using my valuable resources to store and manage that. I'm optimizing the best possible cost structure for that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. We have a lot of presenters that are coming up, and they'll talk more about the portfolio. But I think the key takeaway from this slide is it's a very broad range of solutions from Dell. We service very small businesses from 5 or 6 people to some of the largest of the Global 500 worldwide. And so as you can imagine, the problem sets that those customers are struggling with, the amount of IT staff those customers have, can vary greatly as well. And so with this portfolio, it enables us to tailor different solutions to different customers' needs. What we're also seeing is it's not just the solution that has to tailor, but it's the way that people consume those solutions that's also changing. If you think on the far left here, a lot of big companies have large IT staffs, large IT budgets, and lots of expertise. And what they want is a product that integrates in with this massive infrastructure that they already have. They may have spent tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in that storage infrastructure, and they want to preserve that. So what they really want to do is get a product, do it themselves, and integrate it in. And certainly we're happy to engage with customers in that type of fashion. For other customers, they want more of a best of breed. I want to pick this HBA and that kind of network switch, but I want this customized solution, and I want that all to just work together. I don't want to have to worry about it. A lot of times that ends up being vendor-led. We see a lot of different customers, a lot of different environments, and it gives us a good, strong point of view on some of the best practices. And so people will look for more of a vendor-led. But increasingly, particularly in what we would consider more of the mid-market, we're seeing customers that don't want to mess with that. They don't want to buy different storage arrays and rack them up and stack them and cable them and provision them. They want it to come as a proven and pre-integrated stack. So increasingly, that's an offering that Dell's been making. We'll talk about more of those offerings as we go on today, but it's a real exciting opportunity particularly for the mid-market that doesn't have a lot of IT staff, doesn't value necessarily that degree of customization, wants something that works, it's quick time to value, and easy to manage. But for people that do want a more customized solution, it's important to know that Dell has end-to-end services to help customers with their storage challenges. It can start on the very front end with design and optimization, so we can come in, take a look at your existing infrastructure, take a look at what kind of data you have, what kind of usage patterns are being used on that data, how often the data is being accessed, and make a recommendation around a storage consolidation or tiered storage type of a solution to optimize that. A lot of these are heavily automated tools, so we can actually put agents in your system. They'll be monitoring and tracking that usage over 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and then come back to you with a detailed report and recommendations. We can hand that to you, and you can go off and implement and deploy on your own. Or, if you choose, you can work with Dell, and we can implement it and actually deploy it and get it up and running. If you want help on the ongoing management of it, we've got services around fully managed services to take that pain away from you. And then finally, kind of support and maintenance services as well. So I think the important point to note here is that there's not kind of one-size-fits-all type of an approach. We're not going to tell you that the right approach is always a managed service, outsourced type of an approach, or this type of implementation. But there's a flexible, kind of fluid opportunity here to pick and choose how you best want to engage. In the interest of time, let me just move to this slide. It's not just Dell, though. I mean, of course, we're pretty excited about what we're doing, and we'll talk a lot about that today. But increasingly, it's the press and the analysts and our customers that are talking about how different Dell's approach is. And we've seen a lot of market validation of our technology. If you look at some of the recent quality awards from Storage Magazine, #1 in product reliability and tech support. So we realize that people are going to have problems, but it's the partner that stands by you and that helps you get through that you're really going to value. So #1 in product reliability and tech support, #2 in overall customer satisfaction. And this is against everybody, the entire world of storage providers. If you look at the most recent Gartner Magic Quadrant, so the annual report that Gartner does talking about the people that have the most complete vision and the highest ability to execute, Dell was just ranked in November, which was the most recent one, up in the upper right leaders quadrant. So you got Gartner, you've got the press, you've got other analysts, and you've got customers that are also validating a lot of what we're doing in the marketplace. So to summarize, our view of the right storage architecture is it's fluid, constantly adapts to change, but without a lot of manual intervention. You don't want to be buying a storage architecture that you end up having to manually go in and move data around. You have to manually go in and optimize. You want that to be heavily automated and just happening in the background. Transform your rigid cost center to a flexible productivity center, and ultimately help shift your IT budget from operation and fixed cost more towards innovation. With that, I thank you very much and hope you enjoy the day.